happy to welcome today Ryan Grimm. He's a reporter at Drop Site News. He's the author of We've Got People and co-host of the show Counterpoints. Ryan Grimm, welcome to the podcast.
How you doing, Matt?
I am doing great. Thanks for being here. And I want to just get your thoughts. Obviously, Bernie Sanders and AOC have started this Fighting Oligarchy tour. They're drawing something like, 30,000 people to a rally in Denver.
Make America great. You got to have the best educated workforce in the world.
I believe that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, if a person gets sick, they shouldn't go bankrupt. Common sense.
Let's just start broad. What do you make of that turnout?
Well, on the one hand, it's as somebody who vaguely is sympathetic with the kind of democratic socialist tendency, it's nice to see. Like I'm always gratified to see people who want to collectively come together and make the country a better place for everybody that's in it. On the other hand, part of me is like, is it too little, too late? This was an energy, a tendency that rose, out of the wake of the financial crisis in 2008, takes off of, Occupy Wall Street, and then surging into the first Bernie Sanders campaign, and then very much got derailed by, what people call the Great Awakening. And the time in between saw, Democrats go from their biggest complaint about Bernie Sanders was that there were too many young white men who supported him. They called them Bernie bros. To now wondering, why don't young men of any race support Democrats? And I think the answer to that question kind of lies in the detour that it took. So the question is, did they squander the moment in a way that means that they're kind of cast out for good? I don't know.
So Bernie obviously has this populist authenticity. He I think at some point he had to kind of bow to the woke gods, but generally speaking, he's much more focused on class consciousness, class warfare, as opposed to identity politics.
And even his 2020 campaign, there's this, like, on the left, there's this vague criticism that the 2020 Bernie campaign was more woke than the 2016 campaign. And I wrote a book that covers that campaign, and I looked very closely, and there's basically no evidence to actually support that. It's Bernie still just being Bernie. The atmosphere had shifted pretty substantially from 2015 to 2019 and 2020, and I think that's what people were feeling. But you go and look at Bernie's stump speeches, you go and look at his staffing decisions, his policy positions, basically pretty much the same. I think the thing he got tagged for the most was saying that the Boston bomber should be able to vote. But that's not exactly really a woke thing. I think that's just Bernie being consistent. And he's like, this is my principle. Everybody should be able to vote. And when I hold a principle, it means I hold it when it even has an unpopular, result.
Well, this is a little bit of a diversion from the main theme I want to go with today, or the gist of what I want to talk to you about. But one thing that sort of pissed me off a little bit about Bernie, or maybe question if he has the fire in the belly, was during, I think it was the 2016 campaign. Maybe it was 2008. Did he run? He didn't run in 2008. Must have been 2016. Yeah, when he's running against Hillary, and I thought he kind of had her against the ropes. And then he's like, nobody cares about the damn emails. He had a chance to really go after her over those emails, and he totally backed off. Do you have any thoughts? Well, I know it's water under the bridge, but I can't get past that.
Right. No, that is a very Bernie thing to do. He does not want to win in what he sees as an impure way. He has even when he was running very close races for the House, he had this thing that he would not do negative campaigning, and he would not allow attack ads against the opponent. He thought that was impure and improper and wrong. And he wanted to present his vision for the country, and he wanted people to either support him or oppose him based on the resonance of that vision. And I think that's the exact thing you saw there, that his problem with Hillary Clinton was the money she was taking from Goldman Sachs, was her and her husband's support for NAFTA and the hollowing out of the middle class, her role in bankruptcy reform, and on and on. he did not really want to win based on her poor OPSEC around her Secretary of State emails. So that is it's true to his like historic approach to campaigning.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that there was a moment in time when there was this candidate who was attracting all of these young people, who was authentic. He was tapping into this populist zeitgeist. And rather than going with him, the Democrats went with a standard issue, corporate Democrat. That allowed the Republicans to kind of outflank them and swoop in with a different type of populist. Fair?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, and the book we've got. So we've got people covers 1970s up until like 2018, the victory by the 4 squad members in the midterms there, and talks about the rise of Bernie as this Burlington socialist mayor who really only gets involved in Democratic Party politics to support Jesse Jackson's campaigns in 1984 and 1988, which were the kind of original challenge to what became the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. And at the end of that book, I say, like, if the biggest threat to Democrats might not be Trump winning re-election, it might actually be Joe Biden beating Trump, doing such a milquetoast, pitiful job that he then creates space for a new Trump to come in, maybe a different somebody, or Trump himself to come back, and come back with a vengeance, and come back actually knowing what they're doing. And for some readers, that was like read as kind of a prophetic call. On the other hand, for people who are kind of steeped in left analysis, that's like bog standard leftism 101. That, like, if you confront authoritarianism, fascism, whatever you want to call it, if you confront that with some weak centrism, that is going to collapse, because the kind of corporate sympathetic centrist stuff, they're more afraid of the left than they are of the right, until it's too late for them.
So, I mean, look, if you had said this in 2020, I would have found it absurd, right? I mean, so first of all, Bernie Sanders has the socialist tag. He had said good things or questionable things about Castro. Joe Biden could play. He's Scranton Joe. He has the potential to not scare suburban moms, but also pick up some, working class voters in Pennsylvania and the Rust Belt. And it did work in 2020. But today, what you just said to me doesn't actually seem crazy anymore. And it seems, at least I would say, plausible.
Right. And what Bernie's out there on the trail saying now is that, Democrats would be in much better position if they were defending genuine gains made under Biden. Like, Trump is going to come for your child tax credit. Like, let's say you were getting $300 per kid per month up until now. And now Trump is threatening to take that away. Like, that's strong ground for Democrats to argue on. But what is there really for Trump to take away from the Biden years? I mean, you can undo a bunch of the climate credits, and you can not spend the climate money, but that's not personally taking anything out of anybody's bank account. And at least Obama had Obamacare, and they could say, look, they're going to take away their Medicaid expansion. They could take away the subsidies for your premium, and tens of millions of people are getting that, and Republicans found that they didn't actually have the power to do that.
Now here
John
we have
McCain
this moment where people are desperate for Democrats to step up, and you've got Chuck Schumer. Look, I think he did the right thing on the shutdown, but obviously he's not the right man for this mission. You've got whatever his name is, Gavin, whatever, out in California.
Yes.
Basically,
Gavin. Yeah.
Gavin Newsom getting into the podcast game. Like, that's like, we need another podcaster.
Yes.
And Bernie and AOC are out there, and they're turning out like tens of thousands of starving, excited supporters. Could Bernie, I know he's getting up in years, but man, he doesn't seem to have missed a step. Now, we did the problem is the context of Joe Biden, what happened with him, in the age issue, but could Bernie be the answer?
It's funny. I think Bernie. I think it would love to run again if he thought that it was remotely physically possible. And I think that if he has 3 years is a long time for an 83-year-old.
Yeah.
For some 83-year-olds, it's not. And you're the same at 86 as you are at 83. But then 1 month you collapse 10 years. At that age, you can go off a cliff very quickly. But I think Bernie has that thing that a lot of politicians have, which is that to their dying breath, part of them will want to pursue that. Now, the difference between him and Biden, at least he'd be at least clear that it's a one-term thing. Like the idea that he'd be running until he's 90 is kind of comical. I don't know where Bernie gets the energy he has. Like
amazing.
Like all these staffers of everybody always say that they have a hard time keeping up with their boss, but like they're all lying. Like Bernie's staff are serious. Like these 20s and 30s people working for him literally can't keep up with him physically. And it's rather extraordinary.
And speaking of podcasts, he can go on Joe Rogan or Theo Vaughn or whoever and talk for 3 or 4 hours, right? He can go to people on the right, he can go to people on the left, and he just is him.
Yeah. No, there's a charm to somebody who has been saying the same thing for 50 years that you at least know that he means it. And like it or not, like this is who he is. And Democrats can't reproduce that overnight. It took him decades in the wilderness. You can't, to say the same thing for 50 straight years, you have to be around for 50 years. But yeah, that's a huge problem for them. Like they don't after him is AOC basically. There's nobody really.
Yeah. Which brings me to I don't want to beat up on AOC, but so number one, she's a woman. Dems are now 0-2 with women, like fair or not, right? It is what it is. And then unlike Bernie, who I think has eschewed identity politics in favor of class consciousness, AOC, I think, has embraced identity politics to a greater degree than Bernie. And so I think it would be easier. Now, Trump ostensibly won't be running himself. But I think it would be easier for Republicans to paint her as like out of touch and woke than it would be for Bernie. I mean, they'll try with Bernie, but I just don't think it would stick to Bernie.
Right. Yeah. And on your first point, we had Dave Weigel on Breaking Points this morning, talking to him about attending a bunch of these rallies, the Bernie AOC rallies. And he was saying when he would talk to people about AOC's potential presidential prospects, they would all bring up what you said, that like Democrats are now quite gun shy. They see the scoreboard too. And it is an unfair irony that somebody on the left would get tagged for, 2 centrist women losing. But in voters' minds, they all try to play pundit, and they're just as good at it as we are. Like nobody knows what they're talking about, but they make the same connection that you do. We tried twice. I'm not sexist. I'm not misogynist, but the country is. And so therefore I wouldn't, you end up talking yourself into not voting for a woman because she's a woman, but not because you don't like her, but because you think other people wouldn't like her. And I do think you're right. For similar reasons, it's easier to tag her with the out of touch woke label. And also she's more fluent in the language. Like you hear Bernie whenever, and he's just not there on that woke stuff. Like you can just hear it. Whereas she, is, of a generation where it's like water in some ways. And so then swimming in a bigger pool, is more difficult.
I just said,
and also you'll see, like, let's say, like right now on the left, in the kind of trans world, like if you say, I think we should engage with the conversation around men's and women's sports. We should engage with this. Hear out the arguments on all different sides. Like there is a vocal cohort that will just light you up, and then that creates a news. It doesn't create a news story now because nobody's running for president. But like you can imagine, then how does she respond to that?
Yeah.
Does she? And so
she needs a Sister Soldier moment.
Right. Yes, but with sister soldiers everywhere, not yes, it's it'll be that'll be a real challenge.
I just have
Like the
Mike
country
Murphy
feels
on.
like it's moved on
Mm-hmm.
and has
For
like come
now.
to a moderate place on this. That's like where the country kind of feels. And I think that there will be room to slam the Trump administration for excesses in the other direction. But a lot of factions within the Democratic Party haven't actually moved on.
So Mike Murphy was saying, I was asking him who else is out there, and he was talking about this congresswoman out in Washington State who is like a mechanic or owns a garage or something. Goose something.
Gluesenkamp Perez, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of her, or are there any other rising stars out there who would be a little younger than Bernie, but possibly could capture the moment?
One of the ones that has some Bernie level of authenticity is actually Sean Fain, who's the head of the United Auto Workers, and he ran for UAW president against the old corrupt guard, overthrew them, and then launched a very aggressive strike against the big three, winning huge contracts. And he's been campaigning a lot he campaigned for Dan Osborne, that independent Senate candidate who ran in Nebraska and had Deb Fischer running very scared towards the end. And Sean Fain was out with her. And there's going to be sounds like there's going to be another big contract fight late 2023, late 2026 or 7, whenever that is, maybe January 1st, 2028 or something. I think they're trying to line it up for. Depending on how that goes, you could see a Sean Fain, like somebody from the outside, because Fain at least would also have the Bernie aspect of he's been fighting the plutocrats, fighting the oligarchs his entire life, and he's a mechanic, and
never been elected. So is that right? So that gives him the outsider angle thing.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, Marie's interesting. The Washington State rep. But these are just House members. Like, do they It's so hard to know if they translate on the national stage.
Yeah, but start getting out there. We've got time. And one thing I think is pretty clear. I mean, look, I feel like Gretchen Whitmer is a very good politician, but she's a politician.
Mm-hmm.
Gavin Newsom's got really good hair, but I think he seems like a douchebag.
His hair's too good, yeah.
And I mean, we can get on the list of like Kamala Harris. I think she ran a pretty good campaign, all things considered. But again, so it does seem like they need to turn the page, and there needs to be a new character to emerge. Just like nobody in 2013 would have thought that Donald Trump would have been the Republican nominee, or God forbid, the president.
Right. Yeah. And, if times hadn't changed, I think somebody like John Ossoff, who is up for re-election in 2026, if he wins, like in the old days, like he's automatically a top tier presidential candidate, winning a couple times in a swing state. But it almost feels like anybody tied to the system comes in with these
too slick,
bias.
Technocrat.
Right.
What do you think of What do you think of Fetterman? Now, Fetterman's interesting, right? Because he had the stroke. That could obviously be problematic. He has been very pro-Israel, which could offend certain aspects of the left. I think he was actually fighting with AOC, where Fetterman's supporting Schumer and the shutdown. Whereas AOC, so he does have that everyman sort of regular guy quality.
Yeah, he scans like a regular dude. He does. He's betraying such a visceral hostility to the left that, like, in such a needless kind of way, that I don't quite get where, like, what the upside. Like, I understand like distancing yourself from the left, but like it feels personal. Like he feels like he kind of hates and has like contempt for, like, basically half of the party. And so how that pans out, and how you kind of unify the party with that level of like hostility for it. Even
he
Bernie
was from that wing, right?
He was. He like rose up in the Bernie wing of the party up until October 7th.
Wow,
it seemed like, actually. And I don't know medically how how his recovery's going.
Well, he was on the Bulwarks podcast with Tim Miller. I listened to it. I thought he sounded fine, but
I think he was back basically.
but Tim Miller later said that it was not good and that it was in fact bad and that it was probably disqualifying.
Yeah, I haven't listened to that one yet. I caught him on Rogan, and he was struggling then, and to get through, and he's got the auditory processing issues that he has to work out. But it seems like he's progressively getting better. But maybe the level of hostility he's showing to the left gives him that outsider status somehow. And it doesn't. And the left is pretty weak anyway. If he wins the nomination, it's like decent number will sit it out. But it's not like they have much else to do.
Right. So, in Germany and other parts of Europe, younger voters have been abandoning centrist liberal parties for more extreme alternatives. Some people think this is due to algorithms, which are pushing us to the right or to the left, as opposed to having a shared common culture and everyone watching Johnny Carson. Do you see parallels between that and the appeal of AOC and Bernie among young voters in America?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that social media is, playing a non-trivial role in how our politics are being shaped. I think the precarity that all young people are living in too is such that they don't feel like they're going to be better off than their parents, and they don't feel like if they're even well enough off to have kids, their kids are going to be better off than them. And so, under those conditions, you're not going to get very stable politics.
So, I was noting earlier that Donald Trump kind of captured this authentic populist vibe, and I certainly think that makes Bernie more appealing. But how much of the excitement around AOC and Bernie right now is also due to Elon Musk, right? So this tour has Oligarchy in the title. Should actually be Plutocracy, I think. But either way, how much of this is like Elon Musk actually opened the door to?
I think that he and the other billionaires around Trump, and then I think also watching Musk and Zuckerberg kind of slobber all over Trump has woken Democrats up to Bernie's critique in a way that they weren't before. Before they were like, "Oh, those are our billionaires." Like Mark Zuckerberg was doing. He seemed like a good liberal. Bezos would talk like a good liberal. Bill Gates is out there solving world hunger. These are curing malaria and all this stuff. And so it gave Democrats this sense that, well, they're just billionaires who were, billionaires like through their merit, and they're just like us. Yes. And now they, for a variety of reasons, they don't feel that way, and so they're open to Bernie's analysis finally. Yeah. And I hope what it means is that if Democrats ever do take power again, that they come in with a vengeance against the billionaire class in a way that they never have before.
Yeah. Well, look, I think us versus them works. Donald Trump is a master at us versus them. I mean, who are them? I guess immigrants are them, journalists are them, never Trumpers are them.
Rich Democrats.
Yeah. Anyone who doesn't go along with Trump 100% is them. Enemies of the people. He has literally said, right? And so, as much as I don't like class warfare, it just may be like, look, we tried. When I say we, Democrats tried Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris ran, I think, a really good race. Now, she had baggage from 2019 that didn't help her, but in 2024, I think she ran a pretty darn good race. She said a lot of the right things. That she's like, she owns a gun, stuff like that. She tried to really be ironic and to calm any suburbanites who, and still, I mean, I'll guarantee you, I know people who are otherwise decent people who do not like what Donald Trump did, but it was like, but Kamala's going to bring socialism. So the Democrats tried to nominate a normie, and it wasn't good enough. So maybe do they have to fight fire with fire? And it's maybe. If Trump is going to be us versus them, Democrats, maybe they can make these billionaires out to be the bad guys. And frankly, it's not like they haven't opened the door to this, being identified as such.
Yeah, for sure. And it depends a ton on what happens the next couple of years, in particular with the economy, because Elon Musk and his like Doge situation are going to scan very differently to people in a world where unemployment is rising and inflation is still going up, and bird flu is raging, and there's all these material problems, and instead you had Musk and these billionaires doing this other stuff that didn't. Now, if the economy is
not only doing
great,
stuff, but like firing your aunt and uncle,
right?
Whatever. Like social people who have Social Security won't be able to call a 1-800 number, and actually verify their identity and get something fixed. They're going to have to like go someplace physically, which could involve travel if you're a rural person, or go online, which a lot of older folks maybe aren't equipped to do that well.
Right. And so that stuff is going to look very different in a world where the economy is struggling. So so much of it depends on how the economy unfolds. And maybe Trump busts a little recession early, and then the economy's improving again by the midterms, and then by the next time, and that's okay. But if not, then a lot of this stuff is not going to look as funny.
I heard AOC in this rally saying like, they're going to try to paint us as radical. I'm paraphrasing here, but she's like, you're going to try to paint us as radical, and then she really laid out a pretty commonsensical, I think she used the word common sense, agenda. Now, like people like me who are on the more conservative end of the spectrum, like I am afraid of fascism and authoritarianism on the right, but I'm also afraid of radical leftism, communism, socialism, the redistribution of wealth to the point where you destroy, incentives, and there's collectivization, whatever. I mean, bad things have happened. There's, behind the bastards has people, the commies too, right? Should we? No, but I also think Republicans have demagogued this. And again, I'm going to talk about the people who are so afraid of Kamala Harris, who was like the most milquetoast mainstream politician you could get, right? Like, how much should we actually be afraid of Comrade Bernie and AOC and their radical agenda?
Yeah, the constraints that still exist and will exist even after Trump is gone in our system means that I think there are no comrades that represent any serious threat to the economic freedoms that a good capitalist American holds dear. Much as I would like to think otherwise, it'd be great if Comrade Bernie in there and with his 5-year plan and redistribution of wealth and all that. But that's not who we are. Like, that's not what this country is really ever going to be, even if you do elect somebody who self-identifies as a socialist. It means you might get a slightly higher marginal tax rate on the rich, and ironically it means you would get probably better antitrust enforcement, which is fundamentally kind of a small c conservative policy, because traditionally big business and big government together were part of like the New Deal kind of social democratic left, but this new left has really embraced antitrust. So you'd get some good antitrust enforcement, you'd get slightly higher taxes, and a little bit more robust spending on social welfare, healthcare, and maybe flat military spending rather than increasing.
Well, let me just say, as someone who's like a Ronald Reagan devotee, watching Elon Musk and now Bezos and Zuckerberg, like, I've been radicalized. I don't really care that much what happens to them at this point. So, I don't want to send them to the gulag, but I'm not going to be too concerned about if they pay slightly more taxes or something like that.
They'll be okay.
Yeah, they'll be okay. They're going to be fine. Let me ask you this. How much of the problem with Democrats, like, the Chuck Schumers, the Joe Bidens of the world, has to do with their ideology versus it is, I mean, it always ends up with Hitler, right, in World War II, but it could also be Franco. But there was a sense at a certain point in history when, liberals, not to be confused with the left, but like liberals were just weak, like temperamentally weak. And now I think that's happening. So how much of it is their ideology as a problem versus the kinds of people who today are Democratic politicians seem
Mhm.
weak and effete and just not real, not authentic, and not up for the fight.
Yeah, and I write about this in the book. We've got people that the 1980s really scarred these kinds of liberals, the Chuck Schumers of the world, in which they fundamentally kind of internalized the criticism against them that they were not real Americans, that they were liberal coastal elites
Mm-hmm.
who didn't know how to change their oil, let alone change brake pads, and that and they that leads to a real weakness, just kind of a weak affect that so many of them have, and hopefully that dies with that generation, and so dies the notion of a real American versus a fake American.
You mentioned fixing automobiles. It makes me think of Tim Walz, who was great at a certain point over the summer. Man, I mean, he got on the ticket because he went on TV and kind of kicked
talking about
butt.
cleaning gutters. Yes.
And then he was great at the convention. So good that I wrote this super embarrassing column where I said, like, I was wrong to be at first I was against Tim Walz because I thought they should pick Shapiro, but it turns out Tim Walz is great. And then I wrote that column, and from that day on, Tim Walz didn't do jack, right? He just curled up in a ball and went away. What happened there?
It's utterly bizarre. And yeah, you could watch it happen in real time. They pick the guy because he's engaging on TV, and a good puncher, and then they just shut him up the whole time. It seems like Jeno Millie Dillon, who was running the campaign, was a bit of a micromanager and just didn't want him out there. And there was some like old dumb thinking, like they were like, this is how we do things as a presidential campaign. The VP and the president go out and they do a joint interview, and that's how they kind of introduce themselves to the world. But they were also hiding Kamala at the same time, so they delayed doing that joint interview for a very long time. And then they're like, well, the way it works is he can't get out and do interviews before they do their joint interview, which nobody in the world was like. They're like, why are you hiding the guy? Nobody's thinking like, oh, well, obviously they're waiting until they schedule their joint interview, and then you'll hear a little bit more from him. And then when they finally do the joint interview, because they had hidden Kamala for so long, people weren't like, oh, this is a joint interview that all presidential teams do. They were like, this lady can't go out on her own and answer questions. She's got to have this guy babysitting her. What? This is weird. And so like they had all of these dumb assumptions about how a presidential campaign is supposed to run. And then they had 42 days to run one. And they took all of these assumptions that are built around a multi-year campaign and they just crammed them in there. Just kind of like the word for it is dumb. And also selfish in the sense that I think a lot of decisions were about like maintaining their own power and status within organizations and ecosystems, at the expense of that institution doing more poorly and losing. Like they'd rather rule over the ruins than actually build something if it meant taking a risk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Malcolm Gladwell has talked about this before, about how for a long time, it's changed recently, but for a long time in the NFL, coaches would always punt or kick a field goal on fourth down. They wouldn't go for it, even though statistically you would actually score more points by always going for it on fourth down. And the reason that Gladwell came up with was because, these coaches want to get another job someday. And if you're seen as sort of a normal coach who does the right thing, you're going to get hired. If you're seen as like a loose cannon who takes risks, then you might not. And so they're not thinking about winning the game as much as they're thinking about their career.
Same with
Similar
politics.
phenomenon.
Absolutely. Yeah. The next campaign is more important. Like if you lose doing the conventional thing, you're fine.
Yes, that's it. So I think it stands to reason that, like, let's say someone like Bernie, sort of the archetype of this, that if the Democrats want to have a shot, Bernie is someone who can excite people. He can do podcasts. He can do interviews. You'll need to hide Bernie. He's not going to be tagged with the woke label. I mean, there's some lefty stuff, but not woke, not the identity politics thing that's going to turn off, like, I don't know, a white working class guy in Michigan or something like that.
Not just white, yeah.
Not if they're white.
No,
but actually
no, I mean,
now
not just
more
white. Yeah.
minorities are also
Right.
identifying primarily according to their economic status and not their, race. So Bernie, even there, could do well. So as we've been discussing, there's a lot to commend someone like a Bernie Sanders, like a populist Democrat who's going to play the class warfare game, go after the rich, the oligarchs, the plutocrats. If you do that, then what happens to the never Trump mom or the soccer mom or the, I don't know what dad, the Target dad, like in the suburbs? They were for Joe Biden, probably, right? Or for Kamala Harris. Do you risk, alienating people that are currently in the coalition, and so you end up losing just in a different way with a different coalition?
Yeah, it's always a risk, and maybe the Democratic coalition is so shorn of its working class element that this stuff doesn't, like, that there isn't even enough there for Bernie to piece together, like or a Bernie type to piece together. They'd have to bring back a significant portion of that working class vote to be able to pair it with these suburban voters for it to even matter. The negative polarization is probably the best thing that a Bernie type would have going for them in that situation. That it's like, look, it's either me or Don Jr. And in that situation, they would think, all right, well, and at least
and
Bernie's
I think with
fighting.
Young people, I mean, that's the other thing. You got to think about the future. And historically, politicians have kind of written off young people because they tend to vote at lower rates than older people. But man, if you lose young people as a Democratic Party, it's kind of game over.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. And then
so speaking of which, let me ask you about this. Now, like, I'm very pro-Israel. Let's put aside what we believe in and just talk about, like, what wins. And with young people, like, I talked briefly about Fetterman, but we didn't really get into this. Like, how important is that issue, and how can Democrats navigate the Palestinian question?
I mean, I think it was quite important in 2024. I think it remains important right now as young people are thinking about, the young people, to their credit, I think, have a much more moral focused lens that they apply to the world in general. And you're kind of, that's beaten out of you as you get older. But it's very hard for young people today to, celebrate or champion anything that, say, Joe Biden did, if at the same time you're constantly reminded every day of dozens or hundreds of children getting blown to pieces. Now the Trump administration is overseeing that, and so I think that can just further.
Have you seen any, like, obviously there were people protesting Genocide Joe. Is Trump being hurt now for his part in this?
Well, I mean, so you see, I've seen this criticism of, like, these people just didn't like Democrats or something like that. But we got a ceasefire January 19th or whatever it was, January 20th, and so it's just a fact that when the war stops, like, in general, the protests against the war are going to stop as well. Now, the war is back on, but we're also in a brand new situation where universities are going to, bring down an absolute sledgehammer on anybody that tries to go out and protest. They're anybody that's on a student visa is going to think twice about it. So, they have.
Yeah, we saw that guy was basically deported, right? Or is being deported.
Yeah, Mahmoud Khalil is in detention still, and they're picking up people and deporting them on student visas now. So repression can work. at least in the short, certainly in the short term. I think Trump will suffer, and I think he knows he will suffer if this continues to go on as it is now. Because he said he's going to be the guy that's going to bring peace, and that Biden is weak. Nobody listens to Biden, but Trump is strong. And when Trump says that we're going to get something done, damn it, we're going to get it done. So if he says all that, and Netanyahu just does whatever he wants anyway, it's like at some point I do think that he pays a price for that.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Ryan. Anything that I forgot to ask or that you wanted to add?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks for reaching out. Always happy to talk. Bernie,
man,
and AOC.
This was a really valuable and informative conversation. Everybody check out Drop Site News. Get the book, We've Got People. Check out the show, Counterpoints. Ryan Graham, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.